For those of you who are coming in, I want to welcome you to the LA Jewish Film Festival webinar with Julie Cohen, and we're going to wait a few minutes until we get everybody in. So thank you for your patience. Just another minute. Okay, I'm going to get started. My name is Hillary Helstein, and I'm the director of the Los Angeles Jewish Film Festival. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for our conversation with filmmaker Julie Cohen, co-director and producer of the acclaimed Oscar-nominated film RBG. I would like to thank our presenting organization and partner, the Jewish Journal, and our sponsors for making this program possible. I would like to introduce you to and express my deepest gratitude to our guest, Julie.
Thank you.
The irony of today's program is that I actually contacted Julie a few weeks ago and asked if she would join me in a conversation about her significant film, as it aligned perfectly with our Courageous Conversation series. One of the many words that describe Ruth Bader Ginsburg was just that, courageous. Of course, nobody could have predicted the tragic fate that would have occurred last Friday and how that would make today's conversation a very different one. I thank you, Julie. You have been so busy on CNN and other news outlets around the clock, but I want to thank you for your valuable time today.
Great to be here.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on Rosh Hashanah, and it changed the new year. She was one of the most important Jewish female figures of the 20th century, and the news of her death was devastating as it resonated for everyone so deeply and so personally, especially at the end of a catastrophic year, already suffering from a pandemic and pandemonium, protests, riots, fires. But we must learn from her and honor her legacy today. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Ruth Bader Ginsburg gave value to all of our lives. She shattered the glass ceiling over and over again, a trailblazer in women's rights and gender equality. She was fearless in her dissents and earned the moniker, the notorious RBG. As we contemplate the days of awe, the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we can reflect on what she meant to each of us. She battled bouts of cancer up until the end, and although her body was failing, her knees did not bend to inhumanity. It is now our turn to not only celebrate her life and work, but to carry on her legacy. She was focused on the future with perseverance and resilience, and so now should we. To quote my friend and scholar, Dr. Michael Berenbaum, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the second woman to serve on the Supreme Court and the first Jewish woman. Although she came from humble beginnings, she never forgot her upbringing or the obstacles she overcame, using them to drive her pursuit of justice. May we learn from her life so we can inherit her spirit and her battle for a better world. Julie, I want you to know I wore this today in honor of Justice Ginsburg and your film. And I made this, and I have one for you too. It's a belt buckle. I want to read to everybody a little short bio about you before we get into our discussion. Julie and her co-director, Betsy West, were nominated for 2 Academy Awards, for Best Documentary Feature for their work on RBG, and for Best Original Song by Diane Warren. They were among Variety's 2018 Women's Impact Report honorees. A New York Emmy Award and Gracie Award winner, Julie directed 8 feature documentaries, including The Sturgeon Queens, which was the winner of Best Documentary at LAJFF in 2014. Julie and Betsy are currently working on the upcoming documentary, Julia, a chronicle of the life of Julia Child. So I want to again welcome you, Julie.
Thank you.
And I want to start, I guess we're going to start backwards. We're all mourning the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but this was a personal loss for you. I know that you've been called onto CNN and all other kinds of news outlets, certainly all throughout the weekend. I've seen you on at 2 in the morning. I've seen you at 10 a.m. Can you talk about this and also how your film is playing a role in the aftermath of her passing?
Well, you know, I feel like for everyone that knew Justice Ginsburg directly, or even knew her just from following the amazing human being that she was, both professionally and personally, it is, as you say, a tremendous loss. And for me, it was just strangely shocking. I mean, you know, really rationally, one couldn't be completely shocked by Justice Ginsburg's passing. She was not only 87 years old, but as you say, had struggled with extremely serious cancer. And the course of her pancreatic cancer, you know, over the past year or so had been, you know, a disease that was initially diagnosed in 2009, had made it clear that she was, you know, really fighting hard and quite ill. And yet when I learned, you know, last Friday evening that she had died, I was stunned, because she was just a person with so much life force and so much determination, and frankly, at this particular point in history, was quite determined to try to live until the inauguration, in her own description, until the inauguration of a new president. And just from everything that I know about her, her fierce, passionate determination her whole life, I expected that would happen. So I was so sad to hear that she had died, but, you know, definitely feeling like it's a great time to look a bit at her extraordinary life. I don't hold the news media responsible for the fact that, like, within, you know, about 2 hours, if that, the conversation turned very quickly about who's going to fill that seat and all the politics swirling around that. I understand that. It's actually a fairly important issue. It has impact on how the law plays out in our country for years or decades to come. It has an impact on the presidential election. I mean, it's important stuff, but still, it feels to me like when someone of her magnitude dies, it really feels like important to step back a bit and reflect on their life, particularly, I think, for us as Jews, at this time of year, a time when we're sort of reflecting on, like, what's really important and what our values really are. So I like to think that that's kind of my role to play. I'm certainly not an expert on the politics of who's going to be the next Supreme Court justice and how the confirmation battle plays out, although actually it's becoming fairly obvious how things are going to play out. But in terms of, you know, kind of reflecting on Justice Ginsburg's life, I certainly find it kind of a source of solace to do that.
You mentioned the other day when I called you, the film has been playing all throughout the weekend. Is it still playing on CNN throughout the week?
So there's a whole lot of different ways. You know, it's been true for a while that people want to gather collectively online to mourn. It's even truer right now in the time of COVID, when everyone's very much more home oriented than they have been, that when something happens, there's a physical gathering. Obviously, people spontaneously on the night of her death just started showing up on the steps of the Supreme Court, and even some small groups were saying the Kaddish, and really some really beautiful different things. I mean, I heard one group singing Amazing Grace, another group doing the Kaddish, so that felt like some parts of the beautiful diversity of our country. But even more than that, people want to kind of gather virtually, and one way certainly they've gathered is seeing the film, and we've tried to create a lot of different ways for that to happen. CNN, very quickly decided to re-air the film 3 times over last weekend. Their platform, CNN Go, is playing it. Hulu sort of made it like, if anyone has Hulu, you'll see that when you turn on when you go to Hulu, like RBG's face, the same one that's over your shoulder, comes out at you. And actually they did a great thing today, which is, actually a lot of people don't have cable. There are a fair number of households that don't have cable and don't have a streaming service and don't want to do a pay-per-view to do. And I know I was actually getting a lot of requests from social media to people like, oh, put the film up for free, not realizing that, I don't own that film. I can't make that happen. But incredibly, Hulu today, just for a 24-hour period, put it up on YouTube. After, don't turn off. I can see how many of you are on there, so don't all click off on Hulu. We'll see you doing it. But when this is over, you have till midnight to just go to YouTube and type in RBG Hulu, and it's streaming for free just for the day. And then tomorrow they're actually doing a theatrical re-release. So both whatever physical theaters and drive-ins are open are doing it, or some theaters, as I'm sure you have experienced in New York and LA, a number of theaters have online streaming ways to film. And that one, which is being done by our distributors, the net proceeds all go to the ACLU Women's Rights Project, the project, of course, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as a young lawyer, was one of the founders of. And certainly in the now 40-some year history of that piece of the ACLU, she was, I think, hands down the superstar of that. So it's really nice to be able to be helping them in that way.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, we have, you can see, we have reached capacity on this room. So thank you to everybody who's come on, and for those people who are watching on Facebook. And if you haven't seen it, now you know where you can see it. And if you don't know, now you know, is actually the words of the notorious B.I.G., not the notorious RBG. So, I mean, I think it's terrific that it's the opportunity, for people to see it everywhere. What are your hopes for the film, for people seeing it?
Well, I mean, obviously this film is now more than 2 years old, and many people have seen it, which has been amazing. Certainly a lot of people, even at the time of our initial release, were seeing it multiple times, which was sort of a surprise. And people in other countries who hadn't previously known about Justice Ginsburg. I think our favorite response to the film was the response of children and little girls in particular. We did not think we were making a children's documentary, but as it turned out, we were, and that started from our very first screenings at Sundance, that there would be little girls showing up wearing, just like you, Hillary, wearing little robes and with their hair and a scunchie and little glasses and carrying a little gavel and with a little collar, and it just sort of started to happen spontaneously, which was pretty amazing. And we just found that the story really resonated with not only young women, but actually girls. And we started interviewing some of them, just like if I was at a screening and doing a Q&A, and I'd just walk up to a kid and ask her what brought her there. And the answers were all great, but sort of one of my favorite answers came from a 5th grader who said, the thing that I love about Justice Ginsburg is that she's so ambitious. And I'm ambitious too, and I think it's great to be ambitious. And I found that like incredible because I mean that's actually not a word that we used in the film, but it's absolutely right. I think she really took in the lesson. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was incredibly ambitious throughout her life. But I loved hearing this little girl whose name was Lucy say that like it was just 100% a positive. Because I mean, like I'm in my 50s. When I was growing up, like well, I was a young woman. Like I was an ambitious person, but you would never say that. Like a girl like shouldn't be ambitious. That's like you're putting yourself out there. It's like it's not attractive. It's not demure. It's not cute. Like, and it just made me feel a lot of hope that that you know that a young girl would be looking at ambition as a good thing and be really seeing that and taking that from RBG's story, because I think it's right there, and I think she's right.
Absolutely. I love that. I love hearing that story. I was like seeing on Halloween all the little girls who are dressed up like her, because it's the future generation, and it shows the impact that she's had on multiple generations.
Yeah.
Which is part of what made her so important. I want to go back now. How did you come to shoot this film? Where did the idea come from?
Well, now you have a special insight into that, because you mentioned earlier that some years ago, I think it was 2014, that my film, The Sturgeon Queens, screened at the LA Jewish Film Festival, along with a number of other film festivals and public television stations around the country. That was a film about the Lower East Side smoked fish store, Russ and Daughters. My first filming experience with Justice Ginsburg was for that movie. She was a huge fan of Russ and Daughters. She grew up in Brooklyn, as I bet most of your audience knows, and I bet many of the audience here grew up in Brooklyn themselves. I actually currently live in Brooklyn, so I can relate to that. And my parents are both from Brooklyn, so I relate to that too. But Justice Ginsburg herself had grown up in Brooklyn. Her parents were Lower East Siders. You know, she came from an immigrant family on both sides. The classic, you know, tenement story. You know, her mother had grown up in a situation where there was like 2 families and with like 7 people each, and like just the whole situation. And her mom used to take her as a little girl to Russ and Daughters to kind of show her where she was from. And sort of like as a reminder of like, you know, all kinds of things, like look what hard work can do, you know, for a family, like also maybe don't get too big for your britches, remember your roots, like all the lessons that a good parent would impart to a child. When I was making that film, I asked the owners of Russ and Daughters, the young people, the 4th generation of the family who run the store now, to tell me who some of their most prominent customers were, because I was going to reach out to the people and see if they might participate in my film. RBG was one of the people they named. So I sent her a note and I asked her if I could interview her for my film about this lox and herring store. And it so happened this was in the spring term of 2013, where the Supreme Court was ruling on all kinds of cases, and including RBG, the dissent that RBG wrote in a voting rights case that actually is what earned her the name, the Notorious RBG. So she was like pretty busy, and yet amazingly, I got a little note back. She's a big writer of notes, and I got a little note back, you know, saying like, you know, here's what I could say about, you know, she said, I wasn't the cook in my family, like my husband Marty did all the cooking, but, you know, I do think Russ and Daughters is a wonderful place, and I have memories of going there with my parents, and like, if you think that would be helpful for your film, then, you know, you can come talk to me about that on camera. So in July of 2013, just after that Supreme Court term ended, I went to the court and did an interview for with the justice about lox. She is in fact the start of the film, and fortunately for that interview, I actually brought her a bunch of Russ and Daughters stuff, like all the celebrity people who were in the film had like a little shot in the front that had their favorite smoked fish dish in front of them. And so I would tell people when I was trying to arrange these interviews, you know, I'll bring you your favorite fish to be in the shot, but then when you're done, you get to eat it. Everyone else just told me when I asked what's your favorite would give me one thing. But for Justice Ginsburg, I got back a note from her, an email from her assistant saying, the justice says she loves the Scottish sturgeon, the Scottish salmon, but you should bring an assortment. So you know, like if Supreme Court justice tells you like that she wants a lot of smoked fish, brought to the Supreme Court.
The whole smorgasbord, right?
The whole smorgasbord. So I brought it in, and she actually sent me not one but two thank you notes. one thanking me for bringing the fish and saying she was looking forward to eating it, and then one about a week later saying that she had eaten the fish and it was delicious. Anyway, that's kind of a long story, but it's sort of my RBG backstory. Meanwhile, and probably a little bit more relevantly, Betsy West, my directing partner in this film, had done an interview with Justice Ginsburg in 2011 about her history in the women's rights movement and about the cases that it was for a PBS project called Makers that was sort of like an online archive, and also they sort of, you know, they interviewed 100 different women and they wove it all together. I was involved in that project too. I did many of the online pieces. And so that was 2011, 2013, and sort of shortly after that is when RBG was becoming, you know, weirdly in her 80s, this big pop culture icon. So I spoke to Betsy and said, you know, somebody ought to make a film about Justice Ginsburg, and like, why shouldn't it be us? And we approached her, and it took us, it took about a year and a half for her to agree, but ultimately she agreed, and we made the film.
Do you think if you brought her fish earlier, I'm kidding.
Well, no, I mean, I had brought, I think if I hadn't brought her, the fish helped a lot. I mean, she actually is well known to be a very, she's an introvert. Like, she's not somebody who just like bubbles up, you know, as incredibly smart as she is and as happy as she is to talk, she doesn't like to make small talk. So in times that we were filming her in between the actual filming, if you sort of try to chat with her about something, like, it didn't go over too well. So you find that certain things she really loves to talk about. She totally loves to talk about the law. She loves to talk about opera. She loves to talk about any kind of art. She likes to talk about books, and she likes to talk about food and smoked fish. So if the conversation was kind of lagging in a small talk, I'd be like, remember that time when I brought you the sturgeon and the salmon, and then she'd light up, and and then she would tell me the story of like how she, you know, that her son James had been coming to visit her, and that they had eaten it and what they had done. So I definitely got a lot of mileage out of that smoked fish gift.
That's very funny. Okay, so it took you all this time to finally for her to agree. What was the first thing that you did with her, and how much time did she give you? Meaning, I guess, with the first scenes and
you know, it's a little complicated. We for the film, we did almost everything that didn't involve Justice Ginsburg before we did the stuff that did involve Justice Ginsburg. The first step, after she had told, when we approached her initially, she said not yet. She didn't say no, she said not yet. So we went back to her a few months later and said, like, you know, it takes a long time to make a documentary, and we understand you're not ready to do an interview yet, but would it be okay if we start interviewing some of the other people who have been key in your life? And we kind of felt like if we did that, she would start to get a sense that we were very serious about this. So we did that. So there was quite a number of months of doing that. And then at a certain point in that process, you know, some of these people we were interviewing were friends and former colleagues and that kind of thing of hers, and some of the plaintiffs in cases that she had argued. And someone in her office, we sort of sent her an email kind of keeping her apprised of what we'd been up to, even though we kind of knew she had been hearing about it. And she sent back an email, her assistant, saying like, Justice Ginsburg wants you to know about a number of things that she'll be doing over the next year. which she thought might make good filming opportunities. So that's when we started sort of basically following her around to all these different events that we went with her to Memorial for Justice Scalia, where she was speaking. We went to both a talk that she did at the Glimmerglass Opera Company in upstate New York, and then we went also to that amazing performance where she both the rehearsal and the performance of the Daughter of the Regiment, the opera that she had a speaking role in at the Kennedy Center. We went to a lot of different talks that she was giving for college students, law students, high school students. We went to the Virginia Military Institute, where she was where she was visiting for the first time in commemoration of 20 years since the ruling that she had written that opened that institute to women. You know, so all these different events. So that's kind of how it felt like we were getting to know her. Like we wouldn't. She was doing her thing at that thing. We just had our cameras, but we'd be like, hi. And then sometimes we would like we would arrange with her staff to meet her, you know, backstage or whatever, just to say hello. And those were actually the times where I always talked about the smoked fish. It was an example of a fairly awkward thing, but because we did not know each other so well. And so after, you know, close to a year of that, we asked to, and of doing all the other interviews, we asked to meet with her in her chambers, and she granted us that. I mean, we told her we were going to be in Washington because we were interviewing actually Lily Ledbetter, the plaintiff from the case that ended up that ended up letting women sue for pay discrimination, and without the statute of limitations being as much of a factor, and it ultimately led to the Lily Ledbetter Act. Anyway, we were like, we're coming to DC to interview Lily Ledbetter. Like, if we could meet with Justice anytime, that would be great. We sent her that email like a month before we were coming to Washington. Didn't hear anything. We told her we'll be there Thursday and Friday, whatever the dates were. And then like on Thursday night, we get a call from her assistant saying like, can you come see the justice tomorrow afternoon? And actually I was doing Betsy and I tend to split up, and I was doing that interview, and I called Betsy up like, come down to Washington, we're meeting the justice tomorrow. And we came to her chambers and talked to her about how things were going so far. We sort of had a list of things that we wanted to ask. You know, we'd love to get some footage of you with a family member in your home. Could we do that? We, you know, sort of thing after thing of all the personal stuff. At this point, we had the interview with her scheduled, but it hadn't happened yet. We were going to be doing the interview in July when the court term ended again. And the very last request was, and will you let us come to the gym to film your workout? Which at that time had gotten a lot of attention in the print press, but had not been memorialized on camera in any way. When Betsy asked that question, there was like Justice Ginsburg was a big pauser. Like she tends to pause, and that time there was like a 15-second pause, and she just very quietly said, "Yes, I think that would be possible." And we were surprised. We had not expected that she would say yes to that request. It was also a request that we quite intentionally wanted to bring to the justice directly, rather than, because we knew that if we, you know, asked the public relations people, they would shut the request down and it would never even get to her. So when we asked her face to face, she said yes.
That's amazing. So how did you come to use that footage then as the opening sequence? I mean, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, you know, truthfully, we had in mind that if we had that, it probably would be the open, although we didn't know what it was that we were going to be seeing. I know I personally was very skeptical of the print reporting that had happened to that point. Like, there was a young reporter in his 20s from Politico who had gone to Justice Ginsburg's trainer and done the workout himself. You know, the Justice Ginsburg didn't participate in the story, but like Brian Johnson, the trainer, put this young man through his paces, and the Politico guy wrote a piece that said, I I did Justice Ginsburg's workout and it nearly broke me. And you know, it went very viral. People were very into it, but like, we just like, oh, come on. I mean, you saw what Justice Ginsburg looked like. Like, did you think she was doing planks and push-ups? It seemed frankly, it seemed highly unlikely. And we were told that we could film 30 minutes of the 60-minute workout. And, you know, I was thinking like, it's going to be like in the good, like when she's about to like supposedly like plank, they're going to cut us off. But it turned out that all she didn't want us to see was like her tying her shoes, her stretching, her warming up on the treadmill, because she wanted to look like, you know, she wanted to look tough. I mean, as soon as we watched the workout, we understood why she had let us film it. Like, she was proud of it. Like, and it was amazing to watch. And not only her going through the whole routine, but just like that little gritty look of determination on her face, like the whole time. Like, you know, we had two cameras and a sound guy with a boom pole in there, as well as Betsy and I, who frankly didn't need to be there, but there was no way we were going to miss it. We were sort of the gym was small and it had a lot of mirrors, so we needed to avoid keeping ourselves in the shot. So we were like kind of crouched down in the corner, just watching. As we're watching, we were like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Like, I can't even believe that we're here and that we're watching it, and that it's going to be like, people are going to go nuts when they see what this is. So.
Well, it was a treat. I mean, but it was all part of who she was. I mean, she was small but mighty, and she wasn't going to let anything break her. And if it meant, you know, working out like, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger or something in her 80s so that she could be physically strong and mentally strong, it makes all the sense in the world that she would be like that. Did you tell her to wear that shirt? How did that was great.
No. So, and you know, we were there and we were all set up, and her trainer was in there too, and we're just waiting for her to show up, and she showed up on time because she was a very punctual person. And she walked into the room wearing her little blue sweatpants and that big sweatshirt with like "Super Diva!" exclamation point. And like we all looked like, I looked at the camera woman, and the camera woman looked at Betsy, and the sound guy looked at the other camera. All like, oh my God, do you believe it? Look at this. That shirt had been a gift from the Washington National Opera, who they had given that to her to you know, to thank her for her performance. She said many times that like, if she had her druthers, she would want to have been an opera diva. You know, she actually does not have a good singing voice, apparently. She can't really, she said that she couldn't really carry a tune. So obviously opera was not going to be in the cards for her, but like, there was a side to her that really was a performer, obviously, and her choice to be filmed like planking wearing a Super Diva sweatshirt was obviously a choice that she had made, and it was a good one.
It's great. And she knew she'd be immortalized.
Absolutely.
I love that. That's great. I'm jumping ahead, and I'll come back to some of the other important questions, but she obviously was concerned about how she appeared. What did she think when you showed her Kate McKinnon and that you know, the other portrayals of her?
The Saturday Night Live skit. Yeah. Well, you know, that happened right on the same day that we did the big sit-down interview with her in the court. And we had told the court public relations people that we wanted to show her some clips of things that were going to be in the film. People we'd interviewed. We were very nervous, and we did, in fact. I mean, some of that ended up in the film when we showed her the footage of her and Marty together as young people that she actually hadn't seen in many, many years. So it felt like very, very fresh to her. But we also showed her some pieces of the interview that we had done with her granddaughter. Her reaction didn't end up in the film, but like a number of things like that. And the very last clip that we were going to show was this compilation of the Kate McKinnon SNL skits. We were strategizing, like, what are we going to do when if the court asks us what it is that we're going to show her, and they just didn't. Like, it didn't occur to them. They didn't think to ask it. And so we're playing through, and it was the very end of the interview had gone a little longer than it was supposed to, and we sort of had to rush some. So there were a couple of the other clips that we dropped, and we purposely had identified all the clips by number so that I wasn't having to say to Nadine, our associate producer, like, play the SNL clip. I was just like, go to clip 5 now. And it started to play, and there was kind of like a collective gasp in the room because there were like 10 or 12 PR people that were out, and they were all like, oh my God, what are these filmmakers doing? And like everyone gasped, and like, how's she gonna react? And is this weird? And Justice Ginsburg just sort of leaned forward and she said, oh, is this Saturday Night Live? And I said, yes. And she's like, oh, who is that actress that's playing me? And I said, well, her name is Kate McKinnon. And then she watched, she sort of leaned in and she watched. And then she just, as we showed, she just burst out laughing. Like she was like, and then as soon as she was laughing, the whole room, just like everyone sort of breathed out. And like, it was, you have some the good thing about making documentaries is every moment is an unexpected moment, and you have some good unexpected moments, but like there's never going to be a funner moment, I don't think, than that one.
Yeah, it looked great. It also showed another side to her.
Absolutely. No, well, and it's a side that, we got to see a number of times, which is that as much as she's a serious person and an intellectual, she absolutely has a sense of humor. She loves to laugh, and like she would get a little twinkle in her eye, just like she did on that.
What was off the table for her? What was she adamant about that she didn't want to talk about or didn't want in the film?
Yeah, well, we never, first of all, Justice Ginsburg had no editorial control of the film. She saw none of it until the premiere at Sundance, nor did she ask to. So we never had a discussion with her about what was on or off the table, but I will say we absolutely understood that we weren't going to be talking, justice can't talk about cases that are before the court or cases that might come before the court, or what happened as the justices were deciding how they were going to rule in it. So I don't recall if we even had a conversation about that, but we knew, like, she knew we weren't going to ask about that. We knew we weren't going to ask about it. If we had, she would have just said, you can't ask me that. And that's that. And other than that, there really weren't, there just weren't any rules. I'm sure she wasn't, the remarks that she had made about Donald Trump had been controversial. I'm sure she wasn't dying to talk about that, but she actually did, she did have some, a little bit to say about it, and we did include her response in the film.
How is she, as far as letting you into her heart and into her personal life, with her family and coming forth about her family life, or even her childhood?
Yeah, well, she talked to us. As you saw in the film, we did talk to her about her mother's death of cancer when RBG was still quite young. It was actually just before she graduated from high school, and her mom had been sick for several years at that point. That said, she's a person who doesn't like to focus on what's, on the negative. So it's not like she was going to go, all she said was like, I wish I had her longer. And she talks sort of reverentially about her mom and everything that her mom did to impact her life. But it's like, you're not going to be seeing her break down and cry in front of you. That just wasn't the kind of person that she was. She certainly, we were worried. It was, her husband, Marty, at the time that we did the interview had passed away 7 years prior, but we were still concerned, like, is that going to be an awkward question when you say talk about Marty? Is that going to make her sad? And it was just the opposite. She loved talking about him. Like, she could have told stories about him like for hours. Like, even if she got tired of other things, like she really wanted to talk about that. She was quite eager also for us to film her granddaughter, Clara, who at the time was just finishing Harvard Law School. And, you know, RBG was, like any Jewish grandmother would be, was extremely proud of that.
Yeah.
So she was actually eager. And in fact, when we had asked, can we come to your home and film you with a family member at home? She was like, you know, that should be, you know, how about Clara? And have you spoken to Clara? And in fact, when we got in touch with Clara to arrange the interview, and when we saw her and said like, oh, you know, like, why, asked her like, why did you agree to do the interview? And she said, well, I really didn't. Like, my grandmother basically called me and said like, these women will be calling you and asking you to do an interview and you will do it. I mean, you know, she was a person who had a lot of, you sort of did what she asked you to, and that's to be true in her family as well.
It's interesting. Like I said, the powerhouse, but she did it in a way. Well, it was very interesting person. How did you get the interviews? How did you come to choose the people that you interviewed around her?
Yeah, you know, we wanted sort of a mix of. We certainly wanted to focus on the really important work that she had done as a women's rights lawyer, gender equality lawyer in the 1970s, because in our minds, that was the part of her story, which is, you know, so huge, such a major part of her legacy, and which most people, even the people who were big, notorious RBG fans, hadn't been aware of. You know, the number, I mean, that was probably the most common reaction to our film, was like, how did I not know this story? Like, how did I not understand everything that she had accomplished when she was a lawyer, which had been done, you know, I mean, court, you know, appellate litigation by nature is a fairly careful behind the scenes stuff. It's not the same as, you know, Gloria Steinem out on the streets with like, you know, hundreds of thousands of demonstrators around her. It's just a different style of thing. But, you know, it is, I mean, just so many people we heard that from, like lawyers. In fact, Congressman Ted Lieu from out there in California came to our Washington premiere and, you know, said to us, like, how did I not learn this in law school? Like, I had no idea.
Interesting.
People. Yeah, so we wanted to, you know, in terms of focusing on certain cases from the 70s, we basically picked the two to focus on that just had amazing characters who were still living and who were great characters. So they both became fairly major characters in the film. Lily Ledbetter, as I mentioned, she's just like a total, she's just like an amazing, smart, sassy Southern lady. So how could you not enjoy interviewing her? We talked to some people who had been, you know, friends and some family members. And actually a couple of the interviews were people that were suggested by the justice herself, including Kathleen Paratis, who was one of her colleagues in the ACLU Women's Rights Project. We had already interviewed the excellent, another ACLU lawyer, women's rights lawyer, Brenda Feigen, who is an LA Hollywood person as well now. But RBG recommended that we should also speak to Kathleen Paratis and Harry Edwards, who was a colleague of hers when she worked on the US Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit, and a close friend. I don't think if she hadn't suggested some of the other people that she mentioned, we might have found our way to, but if she hadn't suggested Harry Edwards, we wouldn't have known that they were good friends. It's not like we were calling every judge that had served on that court with her. And in fact, we didn't, in the film, you know, she was a judge there for 13 years and we didn't talk about any of those cases because there just was nothing that a lay audience would find super interesting. So we really were talking with Judge Edwards a little bit more about the justice personally, and also his reflections on what she had accomplished. You know, he was aware from his own perspective of what she was doing, you know, fighting for women's rights. So.
Talk about her relationship with Scalia. I mean, you talk about it in the film, but
Yeah, so that's a good, I mean, yes, and we did interview one of Scalia's many children, Jean Scalia, who's also a DC lawyer, because we definitely wanted to focus on that relationship. We thought it was both would be interesting to the general public who maybe wasn't aware of it, and also really had something to say about RBG's character, that she had this incredibly close friendship who most people would view as her polar opposite on the court. And in fact, there were situations in which their, opinions and, their legal writings were quite harsh towards each other. And yet, they were incredibly close friends who had a lot of admiration for one another's intellect and also had a lot of interests in common. We're both huge art fans in general and opera fans in particular, and as we showed in the film, they had a role in operas together when Justice Scalia was still alive. When we started our project, Justice Scalia was still living, and so that was the one kind of big disappointment in production, was that we didn't get to interview him before he passed away, which was, as you might remember, was sudden and not expected. He had not been ill that anyone that the public knew of. It was sad to us, but happily for us, there was great footage of the two of them kind of sparring on stage, including with Nina Totenberg, who was such a good kind of narrator of Justice Ginsburg's story, has known her and been a friend of hers for many decades, and who we happen to have a fair amount of footage of her. She often did on-stage interviews with Justice Ginsburg, including some that we were filming while we were shooting the doc. And so, she was we thought of her as quite a major character. And also, when you're doing a documentary that doesn't have a script, that doesn't have any narration to it, you always end up at a part, as you piece it together towards the end, where there's like a little, just like, oh, we just need somebody. We just need somebody to say that. We just need to transition here and there. So Nina Totenberg was actually the only person that we interviewed twice. We came back to her at the end of the project to hit a few points where we wanted there to be a transition.
And she's terrific. Were you referred to her, or did you go to her on your own?
No, we went to her on our own. We were, we knew we wanted like someone who was like a real long time Supreme Court journalist woman, like that just felt like right for this project. And actually there were a few candidates for that, but and we had thought about talking to more than one, but after we did the interview with Nina, we were like, no, she's it. And if we want more, we're going to go back to her, because she really just is such a lively, great interview, and also like happens to be quite a delightful person also. So it just was fun to do.
What's great is that you did talk about their friendship, and even though they were on opposite ends, they still had this friendship. And I think that's something that's really important, especially in today, what's going on in this day and age, that this country is so divided. But, we can believe in different things, yet we can still come together and share a friendship, and I think that's something that's a lesson for everyone right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really sad that Justice Scalia did not live into the Trump administration, because my thought, had he done that, was that, RBG, as we showed in the film, did so much traveling around the country just talking about how important the Constitution and the rule of law is. Justice Scalia had done a fair amount of that too. He wasn't quite as out there as RBG was, but the two of them had done these little talks together, and I think a number of which, I mean, all of the ones that were captured on tape, which I think was all of them I've watched, maybe there were 4 or 5 of those, and I think having them continue that little traveling roadshow in the Trump years would have been incredibly helpful and meaningful. First of all, just being like, yes, we disagree, but like we both revere the Constitution. like, yes, we have ideological differences and our perspective is different politically, but like we both, that's like nothing compared to how much we love the rule of law. And like also, even when we disagree, like we have affection and respect for one. It's like all the messages that we need to hear now,
Yeah.
you know, and RBG going around saying that by herself was great, but like to have the two of them would have really been good.
He would have been the right, the yin and the yang. He would have been the balance to her. Yeah. You didn't really cover her relationship with Sandra Day O'Connor. Is there a reason why?
No, well, no, truthfully, we had some of that in the film, and we just sort of cut back on it. There certainly is plenty to say. You know, when you're making a documentary, you do tons of cuts, and basically just go almost on a sort of some gut instinct on what's played. Like we had a scene, and it just like there was a point where we're, you know, as always when you're making a documentary, where you're like 15 minutes too long and you have to cut a lot of things out, and it just didn't feel you know, Justice O'Connor wasn't well enough to be interviewed. If we had been able to interview her, she absolutely would have been part of the story, but it didn't, you know, it just didn't work out. And so the stories that we had felt like you're sort of only hearing half of them. And it just, in the end, we certainly included a little bit, but that was a scene that got way shortened.
Yeah. What else ended up on the cutting room floor that you would have liked to see in, but it didn't quite fit?
You know, I mean, in a way, you make the, like there's some facts that are interesting, but like that we definitely felt like they would veer off. I mean, as a young woman, the young lawyer, Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually went to Sweden for several months to write a book about Swedish civil procedure. She learned Swedish. I mean, it's like a very, very telling, you know, of how much she throws herself into something when she's into it. And she loves to talk about it too. Like during the interview, like it was sort of like no matter what she'd ask her, she would often talk about something in Sweden. But it just didn't kind of fit in with sort of the arc of our story. We also had, you know, we used that incredible photo of Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia riding an elephant.
Yes.
We also had great stories from people about her parasailing. She was very adventurous. That was sort of one of the unexpected things of like a little Jewish grandma, that she loved, and she loved to ride horses. Her security detail told us that like when they were looking at Native American cave dwellings in Santa Fe, where she loved to visit, that like they looked away for a minute and she like run over and climbed up one of those wooden ladders to like peer at them. And this is, you know, this is like when she was already in her 80s, and it was like, oh my God, Justice Ginsburg, like don't do that. So the we had a very good parasailing story, but like nobody, as far as we knew, there didn't seem to be any images of it. And in fact, it was in relation to some kind of trip in the south of France that had been sponsored by the dean of a law school. And after the film came out, when we were running around at Q&As telling people that we hadn't been able to find any footage, the dean actually reached out to me and said, like, don't worry, like, believe me, I was there. Nobody took any pictures. I've kicked myself many times that I don't have the video of RBG parasailing, but it really happened, and nobody has it on camera.
That's too bad. That's funny. She's like a little kid.
Right.
Oh, what was I going to say to you? You keep referring to her that she was like this little Jewish grandmother. I mean, she was this powerhouse, but again, she also was this little Jewish grandmother. How did her Judaism inform her life, the way she lived her life and her career?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, she certainly was, especially, you know, late in life, was extremely focused on and proud of her Jewish immigrant family background and all that comes with that, including like, you know, the emphasis on education and you know, all the cultural stuff. She was extremely proud of being the longest serving Jewish justice, a fact that she definitely said many times. Her relationship to Judaism when she was younger was a little complicated, as she described herself, because as in her budding feminism, she really was bothered by the fact that women couldn't be in a minyan. Like the idea that like something isn't official, you know, if you don't have this group of men there. And, you know, something that I know was true for a lot of Jewish women of her background, because interestingly, my mom, who's also basically the same age and from Brooklyn and very similar background, had mentioned the same thing to me. Like it drove her nuts that like when her sister got married, that they had literally gone to the park to find random Jewish guys, because like it's like, what are we, chopped liver, you know?
Yeah.
And RBG said that really it bothered her that girls couldn't be, you know, bar mitzvahed at the time that she was growing up, that kind of wasn't a thing. She just, you know, like the sexism inherent in a lot of organized religion, she was just put off by that aspect of Judaism. I think the fact that, you know, parts of Judaism actually changed quite substantially during her lifetime probably helped. And I think, you know, you saw in the film that you talked about who we chose to talk to. One thing were her two close friends from growing up, Anne and Harriet, who, you know, I mean, I think any Jewish person that watched that is like relating to those women as like, oh my God, I so know them. You know, to me, that just sort of brought in her Brooklyn Jewish character, like meeting these two ladies and seeing how they had responded to her achievement.
That's great. Just a couple more questions and then we'll take a few questions from the audience. When did she first see the film? You said earlier.
She saw the film for the first time at the Sundance Film Festival.
And what was her reaction?
You know, so she sat right across the aisle from Betsy and I. We were maybe like 4 feet away from her, and so we were just staring at her. I mean, we'd already seen the film many times, so we were really just staring at her reaction the whole time, and we were very nervous. But it was just an incredible experience. She was really riveted by it from the very beginning. When we have, you know, classical music, she was sitting next to Nina Totenberg, and she turned to her and said, "I like the music." We could hear her. She was sitting right there. And then, you know, she laughed a lot, particularly, I have to say, at her own humor. Like she really enjoyed her jokes, and she also cried a number of times. Not only in the scenes about Marty, but also in the scene watching herself watching opera and talking about how much opera means to her, made her cry, which was really pretty interesting to say. She had not been scheduled to be part of our Q&A, but one of the audience members asked, like, you know, I'd like, because of course everyone knew she was there. It was hadn't been announced, but it would, like, you know, as she comes in, everyone was aware. And actually the first question for the audience was like, well, I want to know what Justice Ginsburg thinks of the film. And she just like popped right up from a seat in the middle, and she came down to the front, and she just, so for the next half hour, like, we really didn't do anything in our premiere. Like Betsy and I just sat there, and RBG just took questions, and it was really amazing. And
wow.
she really enjoyed it. So that was
oh, that's great.
Great experience.
That's great. Did anybody have a camera on that?
Yes, there was a camera on that. Like because the whole thing wasn't really supposed to be happening. Like that part of Supreme Court rules meant that she shouldn't be really promoting our film, so she could go out as an audience member. As I say, she really wasn't supposed to do the Q&A. But anyone who knew Justice Ginsburg would tell you that, like, you're not, you know, she's going to do what she's going to do. Yeah. And you know, despite that, you know, she was really not supposed to be promoting our our film, she did a fair amount of talking about it. And I saw the same thing even with, you know, her personal trainer wrote that workout book, and she'd be taking it around and holding it up. And,
That's great.
so.
Well, she was a champion for other people. What did she think when you were nominated for the Oscar? Well, for 2 Oscars.
Yes, well, you know, she called us, and it was like you know, it was, we had I mean, that was actually in the period where she had just had surgery to remove a lobe from one of her lungs. And she had been, for the first time in her whole Supreme Court career, had taken a few weeks off from work, and so people hadn't really heard from her. So it was pretty, you know, with about, I'd say maybe like an hour after the nominations came, we, you know, her assistant called us to say that, you know, that we could reach her, and we had a really nice conversation with her, and she was really psyched about it.
That's great. That's great. I still think you should have won the Oscar, but I wrote that to you. The last thing I want to talk about, I know that we have some questions, is I want to talk about, well, 2 things actually. You had, I think, predominantly a female crew. Yes.
All of our, all of the top, both creative and business roles on the film were women. You know, there's the myth that it's like, would be really hard to staff a film with women, and it wasn't. So, you know, it just seemed like a good idea. We had you know, we were telling the story of a woman who had devoted her life to women's rights. We were both women director producers. It just seemed like we should go for women. And even though it meant we were working with a cinematographer we hadn't worked with before, and an editor, we basically just made spreadsheets and had people recommend great doc editors and you know, female cinematographers. And then we just looked at their work and picked some people. And, you know, as it happened, our executives at CNN Films were women. And in that case, we, you know, obviously we would have taken funding from anyone who wanted to give it to us, but I actually don't think it's a coincidence that that this, you know, CNN Films team is women led. And I think, you know, the subject matter appealed to them. I think their gender was relevant to that decision. So.
Interesting. And then how did you get, your music was amazing. Talk about the music and talk about how you got Diane Warren and Jennifer Hudson.
Yeah, so, you know, our composer for the soundtrack of the film was a woman named Miriam Cutler, a great documentary composer based in LA. She, you know, Diane Warren really kind of found us. Like Miriam knows a lot of people, and it sort of became like, when Diane learned that there was a film about RBG in the works, she, you know, when there's a doc about RBG, she really wanted to write. So she called us up and said, I want to write your song. We said, okay. And then she got Jennifer Hudson. And so
there you were at the Oscars.
There you go.
That was amazing. For people who are watching, you can actually go and you can look up, you could YouTube Jennifer, what was it, like the opening sequence at the Oscars?
No, it was near the top, but it wasn't the open.
It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. You go from this grain of an idea and in so much in her style that you just completed this thing. I mean, you didn't just complete it, but you brought it, you know, to the highest level. And it's just an amazing accomplishment. And, you know, my hat's off to you for this. Last thing is, can people buy the film?
Well, you know, you can buy it on, you mean like DVD and Blu-ray and stuff, or you know, you can stream it on, you can just Google it, you can, it's on, if you have Hulu, it's on Hulu. So if you're a Hulu subscriber, it'd be free to you that way. Right now, you could go watch it for free on YouTube. I encourage people to do that. Right now, we're trying to get people into, you know, theaters or through their theater streaming to watch it over the next week when it's going to be doing that way. You can, there's, you know, Amazon's got it, iTunes, you know, it's everywhere. You can, there are DVDs and Blu-rays somewhere, which I'm sure by going to rbgmovie.com will tell you where to get that. So.
Good. Okay, I see that we have, oh boy, let's see what we've covered. Okay, somebody made, they just commented that they've seen it 4 times.
Good.
I've seen it 3 or 4 times too. It's just, it's one of those things you feel empowered every time you watch it. It's great.
Yes, we had a lot of multiple viewers, and many people say like, oh, I could watch it many, but I'll say as someone, as the filmmaker, you watch the film many times, and the truth is like after about it gets better and better each time, but like after about 12, like, then you need like a year break from it.
But do you find though, when you haven't seen it for a long time, that you find things in it that you've forgotten about and you just marvel at it?
I find that with film sometimes. I mean, the truth is this one, I haven't, with all of the extra airings and screenings connected to Justice Ginsburg's death, I just found like I didn't feel like I could watch it. I thought it would be too sad.
Yeah, I understand.
So I don't know when I'll watch it again.
Some distance. I just want to tell the audience, I'm not going to, I see a lot of your questions. I'm not going to say your name and I'm not going to publish them, but I want to thank you all for your questions. Some of them Julie has already answered, and some of them, let me just have a quick read here. Okay, we have a gentleman who said that she's being buried at Arlington Cemetery. Is she being buried with her husband?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know the answer to that. And I was actually surprised to hear that she was being buried at Arlington Cemetery, and I would be shocked if she's not being buried with Marty. So I guess maybe, certainly by the time he passed away, she was already a Supreme Court justice. So I'm sure they arranged to be buried together. And but I've got to say I don't know the answer.
That's a good question. Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, can you tell us about her granddaughter? Will she follow a career in law? They seem incredibly close in your film. And asking this question from my mother in Brazil who wants to watch the doc and hasn't been able to.
Yes, Clara is very much following in RBG's footsteps. She did clerkship with a federal judge. She's worked done some legal work on reproductive rights, which is what she's doing right now. I'm not sure which organization it is, so I don't want to get that wrong, but she's very interested in, women's rights law and actually in politics. I wouldn't be shocked to see Clara running for office one day. She has more Marty. She's a very extroverted, unlike RBG. She's a very outgoing person, and in addition to being just incredibly intelligent and impressive, she's also, big people person. So I wouldn't be shocked to see her going to politics.
That's great. A two-part question I kind of asked before, maybe again, what was your favorite moment with her from one person, and another one, is there a moment that you dearly wanted to get but you couldn't?
Favorite moment was definitely in the gym. No, and I don't think there was any particular moment that there were a couple things that we wanted to film that we were unable to, but they actually weren't the things that we cared about the most. And I think all I'd say was we would have loved to had even more time to film sort of some of the personal stuff with her. It was great filming with her on going to Santa Fe and filming her with her family there. Loved doing that, but it would have been fun if we could do that. She also, in the course of early on, before she was letting us film the personal stuff, she actually had a trip to Hawaii, and we were like, that would be kind of great, like RBG on the beach with like a pina colada or whatever. That seemed like it would have been a good scene.
That's funny. Somebody wanted to know if you attended her service.
No, I happened to be upstate on a vacation with my husband right now, so I did not go and see tomorrow is the lying in state day in the Capitol. I think it's pretty amazing that she's the first woman to do so, and I'm sure she would have appreciated kind of the gravity of that. There's going to be a more the strangeness of COVID is
Mhm.
is an odd time for something, but my understanding is there's going to be a more full ceremony in the future at some point, which I have to go to.
Here's a question that's come up a few times. Did she ever discuss why she didn't retire towards the end of Obama's term?
Yeah, I mean, she always gave the same answer to that, which was that she wanted to, she would stay in the job as long as she could do it full steam. I think, but as someone sort of assessing it, I think it's important to remember where we all were at the time that she was making that decision. She made the decision with the expectation of what our whole country across the political spectrum assumed at that time, which was that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president. I would not, I imagine her sort of wanting to be a Supreme Court justice with the first woman president in office. I think there's, that's sort of possible. I also think following her, following Marty's death, like her job at the Supreme Court was what gave the most meaning to her life. So I'm sure it was hard for her to envision retiring. Yeah. And the final thing is, if she had been thinking, about possibly, if she had been trying to make a decision towards the end of the Obama administration to whether she was going to step down or not, that whole process was completely circumvented by when Scalia died and Merrick Garland was appointed. After all, he died in February of 2016. And that, Obama's, that, the Senate wouldn't let that nomination, go forward. So, by that point, if she had been thinking maybe she would retire at that point, it was too late, as it turned out.
She wanted to hang on. Yeah. Somebody wanted to know if she went to the Oscars with you.
No, that it was, unfortunately, the Oscars came just a few weeks after she had had that surgery on her lungs, and she wasn't even going in to work at the Supreme Court at that point. So, if she had been well, I imagine it might have been hard to keep her from going to the Oscars. I think she might have enjoyed it, although I actually think
in her super diva shirt.
Yeah, I mean, that it might have been a distraction politically that wouldn't have been such a great thing. So, but
would have been fun. Did you hear of reactions to your film from other Supreme Court justices?
Yes, so actually a number, three justices. We heard reaction from Stephen Breyer. Actually came to our Washington premiere and told us how much he enjoyed it. Sonia Sotomayor went to see it at a DC theater, and everyone that was sitting around her and people that were with her tweeted out how much she loved it and how personal what she thought of it. So that was good. And while the film was still out, Justice Ginsburg actually invited us to come to a judicial conference to show the film. And at that conference, it was at the Second Circuit in upstate New York. And at that conference, there was Justice Roberts and she did a Q&A together, in which he let it be known that not only did he enjoy the film, but he was extremely amused by, they actually seemed to have, quite a good relationship, which I think was evidenced by the genuine sorrow that he expressed at her passing this week. But, it's unusual for a justice to have this whole big celebrity thing. It really has never happened before. It's not really what the court is known for, or is, it's not the image the court likes to have for itself. So we were expecting that he might really hate the idea of the film, but he certainly, he seemed to be very amused by the whole situation. And the fact he's like, well, she's a movie star. And then he started to saying like, what was the box office on that again? And it really kind of took us by surprise. But so the three justice reactions we heard were all positive.
That's great. Well, I mean, it had been, I guess it didn't have to be, but I mean, it's such an amazing film and it's so uplifting. And you know, in there is the colleague thing, you know, that putting everybody's differences aside, you know, it was for the love of the Constitution. And I think that they um, related and supported and were a part of that, you know, that very small club, you know. Somebody asked, why the collars? How did that originate?
That, as we do say in the film, and that was our one scene that did sort of involve Sandra Day O'Connor. That was O'Connor's idea, basically, as a way to add a little femininity to the nondescript black robes. She started wearing the collars called jabot, and sort of explained that to RBG when Ginsburg started on the court, like, oh, here's what I do. Like, look, it's a, you know, it's a cool way to like add a little fashion to your robes. And so she started doing that, and RBG started kind of wearing cool ones. And then once she started being known for it, people just started sending them to her. Almost all the ones that she wears regularly are gifts. Often from strangers, like, but if she likes them, like if she liked them as a fashion statement, she would wear them.
Yeah, I love that part of the film about that, and she was showing them all in her closet.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. I'm going to end this on a very interesting question.
Okay.
With her legacy, what was her greatest hope or aspiration for future generations? What did she hope people would take away from her life and her work?
Well, you know, I think she sort of was striving for a day where all of the equality that she had been fighting for could sort of come completely to fruition. She talked a lot towards the end of her life about unconscious bias and, you know, reflecting on how much progress had been made in the law for gender equality, but like that there's still, you know, she used to talk about there's still that situation where you're in a meeting and a woman says something and like nobody listens, and then a guy says the same thing like 3 seconds later, and everyone's like, that's a great comment, which I really appreciated hearing from her, because that certainly I can relate to that that thought. You know, I think the other thing, you know, on a more, you know, the most serious vein is that I think that she hopes that there comes a day where some of the more important dissents that she wrote can become the basis for majority opinions, and that ultimately the you know, criticism she had voiced about other you know, about Supreme Court opinions would take their place in becoming the law of the land.
Well, I want to thank you, Julie. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and I think also it's been a healing conversation. It gives everybody the opportunity to celebrate her life, and your film is a tribute to her, a beautiful tribute. And thank you so much for doing it, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
For our audience, we have recorded this, so you will be able to see it after on Facebook, and you can send friends and colleagues to go see it as well. And I just want to remind our audience that we were honored to be able to have Julie for our free program today. We do rely on support of the community. I know I sound a little bit like PBS, but we need your support to keep going. So please give a generous donation to us on our website. We'd be grateful, and we will continue to do the programs. And thank you again, Julie. Let's all make a toast. Whoops, you can't see it. Unfortunately, it's only water, but to Justice Ginsburg. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.